Our program is part of our Libraries for Job Seekers federal grant, which is administered by the Board of Library Commissioners and funded by the Institute for Museum Services. It's a federal grant that gave us money to provide materials and programs to job seekers in Mansfield and surrounding communities. We're having a series of programs. I know some of you were here last week. John is going to be here again in a couple of weeks. How to find a job, but tonight he's here on resume prep.
Excellent. Hey, I'm John Bates. I'm also known as the Job Guy. I'm a Mansfield resident. I've been a career coach since 1997. For about 8.5 years, I worked for a large career management firm. One of the things that I got to do was go from location to location doing workshops on the topic of job interviews with executive job seekers. It was really interesting because these executive job seekers were job seekers, but they were also hiring managers, and about 75% of them were actively employed at the time. And so I got a chance to ask 4,000 hiring managers what they look for when they hire people. You know, what they look for in resumes, what they ask in interviews, and so on and so forth. And so it gave me a really interesting perspective on how resumes are written, what people look for. I've also interviewed dozens of recruiters, and so I've got a pretty good sense about what is well received by the market and some things that typically may make a resume less effective, and I wanted to share those with you. The other thing I think it's important for you to know is I'm also the president of the Tri-Town Chamber of Commerce. In the Tri-Town world, that's a chairman of the board position, and so basically I run meetings once a month. I really don't run the chamber, but I get a chance to run meetings once a month. So I have a pretty good sense of what's going on in the Tri-Town area as well. The important thing for everybody to understand is what the journey of a resume is, because in the old days, I know when I started in my career, resume was pretty simple. I mean, we had to type them. Right? We had to type cover letters, and we had to put them in envelopes with stamps, and that took effort. And usually the only people who would ever send a resume in would be people that were somewhat qualified for the job, because people didn't want to invest the time if they thought it was a long shot. So a company might get 15, 20 resumes, they look at the cover letters, they look at the quality of the paper, and there were some things that you could do, right? Well, nowadays it's the antiseptic. If I post a job on the web, I'm going to get hundreds of responses from people that aren't even remotely qualified simply because it's fast and easy, and why not, right? And so now it's become sort of a barbarians at the gate kind of an environment, okay, where what we're trying to do is we're trying to use technology to distance ourselves from the onslaught of people. And so what we need to understand is we need to understand that the resume now has to be built first to appeal to a computer. The first thing we have to do is we have to kind of get through a computer, which means, I'm sure you've all heard like the keyword thing, right? So we have to think about, okay, how are we going to identify what keywords are? The second obstacle that it's going to go through is typically a staffing person. All right, normally the hiring manager isn't the first one to look at a resume. Normally there's someone that's paid, either a paid recruiter or someone internally, an administrative person, to be able to decide who actually gets seen by the decision maker. So the arduous journey that I was talking about, the three obstacles to success, the first one is the electronic submittal. So how do you know what keywords to include in your resume? Because the resume has to contain keywords. Well, we really don't know. There's no real list that's going to say that Mary at GTech is going to type in X words, but we can get a pretty good guess by using job descriptions that we find on the web. Now, I recommend that when people build their resume, that they focus on finding like 4 or 5 really well-written job descriptions about what it is they do. Now, sometimes that's hard to do within 20 or 30 miles of Mansfield. So I suggest for that purpose that people look nationally, not because they're looking for a national job, but just simply because there's a bigger body of work to be able to go and pull down the examples, okay? So if you come down with 4 or 5 examples anywhere in the country of a well-written job description, you should get a pretty good sense of what the language is that we don't want to be including in the resume. Now, they're sort of like, I give myself, when I write resumes, which is part of what I do as my job guy practice, is I do write resumes, I give myself sort of an unofficial point system. If I can get a keyword anywhere in the resume, I give myself a point. Now, 4 or 5 years ago, computers really didn't care. They didn't put words in context, right? software is now becoming a little more intelligent. And over the next few years, doing tricks like a keyword section, like a lot of people have done for years, like just dump all the keywords at the end. That would fool the computer and at least get a person to see it. That's becoming less and less likely to work. But it still works some. So give yourself a point if you get the keywords from the jobs anywhere in the resume. I give myself a second point if I get it into the current part of my resume. Okay, whether it's a volunteer opportunity, whether it's an academic situation, whether it's a part-time consulting situation, if I can get it current, it's going to make more difference to the computer, and it's absolutely going to make more difference to the staffing person. I give myself a third point if I'm able to get it into an accomplishment. In other words, if I'm able to say that I've used those key skills successfully to produce a result. Okay? So ultimately, that's sort of my top goal. Not always able to achieve that, but we achieve it as best we can achieve it. So that's really the computer thing, and we're going to get into, the handout that I gave you, we're actually going to go and we're actually going to take the resume section by section. So we're actually going to talk about how to use an objective and a summary and a chronology and all that. So I'm going to get into the dirty details in a little bit. And we can answer, and you can actually ask questions when we're there. It won't distract me. The second step is staffing personnel, and this is really what they do. I mean, they really are there to protect the decision maker from people that are not qualified for the position. That's what they're paid to do. So we have to understand that in order to entice a recruiter, we need to not just have the language in our resume, but we have to show them that we do what we do well, that we find a way to be able to either make our resume look different. I'm not talking about on pink paper, but I'm just saying that we highlight things and accomplishments, or maybe describe ourselves in a summary statement a little bit differently. Branding is a term that you used, and that's what it is. It's how can we get away from a seasoned veteran administrator with 22 years experience with cross-functional communication and excellent project management skills, or something that everybody else can say about themselves. So recruiters are really looking for four things when they look at a resume. So once it gets through the computer, the recruiter's looking for, is the person targeting the job that I have open? And the easier it is for them to say, yes, this person is looking for the job that I'm looking to fill, the better. So we're going to talk actually, when we get into the resume example a little bit later, about an easy way to do that. The next thing that they're looking for is, have this person done the skills that I need them to have done somewhat recently, or do I have to go back to the 80s to look at an opportunity that they know what it is I need them to do? The third thing are, have they demonstrated measurable and recognized impact? Has anybody in your employment history recognized you? This is one thing that I see a lot of people when they write resumes failing to do, is to note when an employer gave them additional responsibility, or promoted them, or gave them a special project. The biggest compliment an employer can pay to you is to award you more work. Now, sometimes when you get the work, it doesn't feel like a reward, right? And a lot of times when we get that reward, it's because they let go half the department. We end up having to do all the work for them, okay? But we still took on that additional responsibility. And it's important that when there's opportunities to demonstrate that you demonstrate it, because it allows you to differentiate. And the last thing is, make sure that you list promotions and progressions. I see a lot of people that leave out the position that they entered a company because they want to take the time, the space allocation in the resume to indicate the job at the end. But it's important to show the growth, because people are looking for, is this somebody that's going to grow with me? Is this somebody that's going to take on more responsibility with me? The things that recruiters don't like are unexplained and frequent gaps in the chronology, obviously. And I know that's an issue for many people here. That's on the list a few times. So we're going to talk about what's the best way to address that if that's the situation with you. Typographical and grammar errors, I see a lot of those. There's really no excuse for that. I mean, we have a chance to be able to review documents before we send it. Consultant without engagement. This came up a few times. It's like, okay, if I've been doing project work, how do I express that in a way that's mostly effective, right? So we're going to talk about that a little bit more in detail in a sec. A lack of balance. One of the big mistakes I see in resumes is a space allocation problem, where you look at the resume and it just jumps out at you that there's this much space about what someone did in the 80s, and then this much space about what they did in the last 5 years. And visually, it's striking. And I work with people, and I'm actually going to show you an example of somebody that had a situation very similar to like the worst of your concerns in terms of gaps and how I addressed it with them, okay? And it worked too. It's always good when it works. And then if the accomplishments are out of scale, this is another problem. People have heard, gee, you know, I need to quantify, right? I have to put numbers in my resume. And so they say that, you know, I had a clerical job for a company that grew to $7 billion. Well, that number has nothing to do with what the job is, right? So we don't just put numbers in for the sake of numbers. We want to put numbers in if they help our story. I had somebody that came to me and she wanted to be a marketing consultant in a startup company. And the very top of the resume said, I've managed marketing budgets up to $50 million. Well, startup budgets are like $5, you know? I mean, so basically you look at $50 million and you say, this person's gonna want a marketing budget that's more than my company makes. Why would I hire that person? So 50 million sounded great, but it really created a disconnect with the target market. Now, once you get through the electronic and you get through the staffing person, now it's the decision maker. It is a crapshoot because decision makers tend to look at really weird stuff because they're looking at screened resumes. They look for weird stuff, you know, like the accomplishments all at the top or, you know, white space or the length of the resume and just weird stuff. And so, in my opinion, the decision maker's opinion is the least critical. Because I'd rather have it on their desk and have them criticize it than have it in a file someplace and not have them criticize it. So they look really at impact and presentation for the most part. You know, has this person really done things that help business the way I would want them to help my business? And does the presentation of the document look attractive? Or is this somebody that doesn't really have any attention or pride? We want to try to express our impact in an appropriate way. I see a lot of people just putting accomplishments in the resume, but that have nothing to do with what they want to do. So if you want to be a project manager and you're stating a whole bunch of sales accomplishments, how's that help me? Because it's nothing alike. And I see that a lot. So we want to look for opportunities, whenever possible, to look for appropriate impact, not just any kind of impact. And we want to try to be different, whether it's in formatting, whether it's claiming accomplishments, whether it's in tone, and we want to be better, not just generic. So I wanted to go through the top 10 tips, and then I wanted to start getting into questions, and we can talk about the individual sections, okay? The first thing is we have to think about the size of our fonts, okay? If you work with less than a 10-point font, it's very likely that someone my age who still are occupying a lot of decision-maker positions won't be able to read what you're writing. We want to use bullets, bolds, and capitals selectively. I get a lot of resumes that I look at that are everything's bulleted. It's kind of like shouting. If you always shout, then pretty soon shouting does not become shouting. You're just loud, right? So we want to bullet the things that we want to draw attention to. So when I build a chronology and I'm talking about what I did in a job, I like to put the basic responsibilities in a paragraph, not bulleted. And then underneath it, bullet the things that I want to draw someone's attention to, whether it was a special project, whether it was an accomplishment, or maybe even it was just a particular work experience that I want to highlight and separate out from the mundane stuff. So we want to use the bullets, we want to use bolding, we want to use capitalization for formatting and visual, not for everything. We want to make sure that we run spell check, right? It's a good idea to have somebody other than yourself look at your document, just because, you know, sometimes spell check doesn't pick up stuff. We want to put our name on every page, so in case they get split up in a stack. We want to use keywords from the targeted jobs, which we've talked about quite a bit. We want to lead accomplishments with action words whenever possible. Okay, here's what I did to drive this result. We want to lead with things like, you know, grew sales or reduced expenses or increased customer satisfaction or improved efficiency or things like that. We want to tie awards to what the award means. A lot of times what I'll see is I'll see separate awards, like a big little section in a resume that says awards, but I won't know what they mean. You know, the most common one is like these sales President's Club things, right? People think they put President's Club in. Well, some companies, pretty much everyone makes President's Club, and other